Welcome to Exit Masters. I'm your host, Jai Waterman, Tech CEO at Blockstation. Today, I want to introduce you to an incredible guest who has 40 plus years in tech, with 14 startups under his belt and more than $1 billion raised in funding. Dan Cruz is a force in the tech and telecom world, from pioneering internet protocols in the 80s to driving billion-dollar exits. Dan's playbook blends old-school engineering grit with new school innovation. Dan has helped startups go public, worked with giants like IBM and HP, advised brands like FICO, Boeing, Nike, and now brings that same fire to Blockstation. I get to work with Dan every day, and now you get to hear one of our conversations. Dan has been candid about his health battles, but hasn't dimmed his spark. He continues to push boundaries and bring unmatched wisdom to startups, investors, and innovative leaders. If you're building a business, raising capital, or planning an exit, Dan's done it at scale. Let's dive in. I want everybody to know a little bit about you and your origin story, how you became the superhero you are today.
Well, my story comes from being a farm boy. Grew up with a father that came to Moses Lake, Washington, when there was nothing but sagebrush in the whole property that he acquired. At the age of 7, I was carrying my end of a 40-foot, 4-inch aluminum pipe that we used to irrigate with. Anyway, I think it gave me an understanding, first and foremost, that I don't want to be a farmer. By the age of 16, I was doing all the farm books and putting in the basis for spreadsheets. It kind of got me all excited about taking the next steps. By the time I got in and out of college, I was ready to apply what I had learned. My first job with IBM and Hewlett Packard. I got those positions not because I was qualified for it, but I had support from my MBA program at Eastern Washington University from 2 professors. They basically opened both those companies' doors. I spent 2 years at each one of them. So I started elevating myself in the technology world. And by the time I finished with IBM, I knew I didn't fit the corporate big company environment. In 1996, I was able to start my own company, raise money from the VCs that launched me into an environment that combined different vendors, technology, and all of a sudden there was a new industry created called the startup industry. I was able to jump on that bandwagon and raise the money to start Network Designs Corporation.
You mentioned that you had left IBM and then you had started your own company. You raised money from venture capital. When you were raising that money from venture capital, what was that process like? Was it your experience with IBM and HP that, professors kind of opened up the doors to you? Or was it after you built these relationships with Cisco and Sun Microsystems, et cetera, that allowed you to get that capital in the first place?
I think what it was a combination of everything you highlighted. There was the relationship from a technical perspective, but at the same time with Cisco Systems as treating me as a part of it, they basically gave me a designation as a co-founder so that their board of directors could issue me shares of stock. And I got a taste of what a cap table was all about, what a term sheet was all about. That is probably the transition that tightened my relationship with those startups. And in the process, I started migrating from being a technical person to being more of a business person.
Well, as a founder, we have to wear different brains, I call it. Sometimes you got to be in the technical mode, sometimes in the business mode, marketing mode. So how was the transition for you when you changed into this new role?
I started expanding my horizons, going after these big projects with DSHS along the way. Those first vendors, along with Cisco, was Cascade Communications, Sun Microsystems, and 3 or 4 others that started having me put on presentations to explain to the industry across the globe what routing was about, what Ethernet was about. And I became, known as the go-to guy for understanding how to build this new generation of network products. And so that was a big transition from technical to business. I won an RFI, then won an RFP from McCaw Cellular Communications. And with that relationship, I was introduced to John Stanton and Craig McCaw, Wayne Perry, and Scott Anderson that had already gone through what I had done, had already banked maybe $10 to $15 million from their previous investments. The award that I got was to build them a new generation network as a cellular provider, which I was able to accomplish, a big transition on their infrastructure, and the fact that the project had been in their RFP had been budgeted for roughly $90 million. My resources and partners at that time were able to come together and transition that whole project and deliver it on time, under budget by $70 million.
Now, was that a bloated budget or was that just extreme efficiency?
You're listening to the Exit Masters podcast, brought to you by Blockstation.
Or something that you did in order to
First and
come
foremost,
in?
50% of that 70% was bloated. And that was the combination of IBM and their partner, one of the top 5 consulting companies for the technology sector. Oh, I'll mention the name. It was Anderson Consulting, called Accenture today. And their customers were surprised at that report when it was published. There was a lot of companies that put the industry on notice that bloated RFPs were not going to be acceptable.
So you changed the industry. You had the mindset of a startup amongst these large corporate conglomerates, and you went in there with the startup mindset and changed everything.
Yeah. And that was my first major win that allowed me to even go further through McCaw. The documents that I produced and drawings that I had produced became my major launching into the venture capital world and other startups.
Did you already exit, from the previous company, or you're now
I
running
was
2
still
businesses?
had network designs going because of the relationship with McCaw. The number of clients we were servicing were weighing us down. In the 1-year period that I worked on Max 1 for McCaw, I went from 21 projects to 2. And the 2 were that Department of Social and Health Services, which was paying us about $1 million a month, and the McCaw Cellular project. I knew that I had to be focused and transition my approach to doing business. But the one thing that I had working in my favor at the time was the success of Max 1. I was brought into the inner circle long enough for me to deliver on cellular digital packet data. That was an industry project where the A-side carriers, T-Mobile, AT&T Wireless, Verizon, everybody had the idea that shouldn't we be able to run data over our networks?
So this is back in the days where phones were just used for calls, and then basically you guys were saying, hey, can't we send other information, other kinds of data, whether it's videos, images, basically any type of data at that time?
Yeah. So I wrote a specification for the cellular digital packet data, and we put it to test for the A-side carriers. And with that, the $100 million was allocated. And in 9 months, I was able to finish the project and demonstrate it at a Comdex Interop show in Las Vegas to the entire communications industry around the globe. We had a group of people on roller skates in 5 different parts of Las Vegas that were able to send text files of documents with attachments of photos, pictures, I think 11 different types of applications. I won over the McCaw people. 1 week after we finished the Las Vegas proof of concept, so to speak. McCaw was acquired for $13 billion. So their budget amount portion, these 11 A-side carriers, their share of that cost was less than $15 million, and $13 billion that they won over with that $15 million investment made them the acquisition by AT&T.
What year was that?
1993.
It's 1993. $13 billion is a lot more than $13 billion.
Yes, it was very
So
much.
that's
So,
quite significant. And that's because of the protocol that basically you wrote and created that allows all these different companies to move data essentially across the internet. Would that be correct?
you're spot on.
Oh, and so from your company's perspective, I understand you're part of the inner circle. You're working closely with them in terms of putting together these protocols, etc. It's your ideas and technology that you built that allowed this exit to happen. How about for your own company? Was your own company part of that exit?
Yes, we were. Because we had signed a contract in the beginning, we had equal ownership of all the IP that was created by virtue of the Max One project and the CDPD project. Of that $13 billion, we were awarded $100 million of that money. I was able to get enough money to pay off all my creditors. There was a lot of activities that went on that had me really deep in the hole.
When you started Network Designs, did you start with the intention to exit, or were you just starting a business because it was interesting to you?
Yeah.
What was your mindset?
Well, during that time, before McCaw and the early days of network designs, I had this thought that if I was very successful, I could sell my company to somebody like IBM, my competitors. The reality was I didn't understand the investment world tied to the executive team of a company and the dynamic of the company to the board of directors. I was approached on 3 occasions to sell the company to Accenture, AMS, American Management Systems, and Wang Laboratories.
You've got these different offers coming along, and when McCaw gets acquired for $13 billion, which is a nice number. Well, what did that process look like in terms of you signing over the IP or you negotiating for your portion? What did that process look like? Was it a couple of the close people sitting around the boardroom? Was there a lot of lawyers involved? Just walk us through that a little bit.
Well, my exit strategy was being acquired by, a third party. The process was very heavily tied to lawyers. The legal cost in those days was extremely high. It was hard to find a intellectual property attorney that really knew this new environment. It was hours of time explaining to them what this part of my specification was protectable or had value. And so through that process of my $100 million offer, it shrank to about a $19 million number. To give you an order of scale, the difficult part was my employment agreement wasn't tied to stock. It was a dollar amount, so to speak. Because the lawyers were learning it, it was a longer process than me writing a specification. And in the end, I left a lot of money on the table. But when you hear a number like that, you think it's all going to be supported. But in reality, it was just another step in my journey to helping startups. And today, I believe I have a very well-earned understanding of what it takes to have an exit strategy that allows you to optimize your investment to exit plan. And that's what's really difficult for a lot of people to understand. You have to have a plan that's documented, understood, and you know how to participate in the process.
Knowing that you would have probably approached things differently because you said you left a lot on the table. Is it that you would have done a lot more vesting and had more shares versus just a salary? What would you have done differently if you could do that again today, knowing what you know now?
I didn't have a grasp totally of what my environment was all about. We talk about ecosystems, we talk about new technologies, we talk about many things, but we don't really take a view of what our value is. And that's the key when you start a company. You're asked, what's your value? What's your valuation based on? And in the beginning, I should have teamed with one or two law firms that were very progressive in their approach to their business model. I left the value on the table at that time in 1993 to 1996. You can't just overnight say, I want to be acquired by somebody. I want to go public, understanding that if you don't document and evaluate what you want to get out of your efforts in starting your company early on, by the time you get to the point that you could go IPO, you don't understand the amount of work that it takes to actually make that happen. Be honest, be forthright, understand whether your culture is going to carry through with the employees, because you're representing them through this process, not just yourself. Then, most of all, what startups often miss is the fact that they need to have very strong financial support, a chief financial officer that will help you achieving audited financials. And if you're not ready to make that investment, understand that you can't go through an M&A activity or an IPO without that.
I'm a big believer in setting things up from the beginning so that you can maintain the right books and records and accounting. So when it comes time to do those audits, everything is ready, everything is structured in place. And I agree with you totally. I mean, anybody doing an IPO, there's no option but to get your financials audited. And if you're doing an M&A, the company that's acquiring you, how can they trust your books and records if a third party hasn't gone through it and done an audit? So I would imagine it would be difficult for any M&A to occur without audited financials, or it could be an added challenge. I guess it also depends the reasoning for the M&A. Is it that they're looking to acquire your product or service or technology, or is it that they're more attracted to the financial nature of what you've built? From your opinion, let's say a fintech company built a very powerful technology and there's an acquirer who wants to acquire them. Like in your case, you built a very powerful technology. The technology speaks for itself. Do the financials matter that much compared to the technology that you built?
That's an interesting question. Technology will not put a business deal together alone unless there is somebody with deep pockets that can sit on a technology for a time until the market is ready. One of my companies called Quintessent Communications built a product called Exchange, which was a technology based on simple standard management information linking technology. It was the first Corba standard for the industry at the time. But what it taught me was I built this great platform for exchanging information between the carriers, be they on wireline, be they on wireless. And there was nobody else in that industry.
Mm-hmm.
First to
So
market
your category.
technology. It sat on the shelf for 6 years because the market wasn't ready for it. By the time Quintessent was ready to start in the market 2 other companies had started, so the board of directors said, let's go forward. In less than 2 years, the company went from 0 revenues to $81 million in revenues. And then the dot-com telecom crash in around the year 2000, they all filed bankruptcy. And Quintessent opened a market, owned the market, but they weren't successful. I've seen that replay itself 100 times afterwards. So you have to be really careful.
You started Quintessence, you built this exchange technology. You were so far ahead of the game, you were too early. Nobody would understand what you're doing or be able to integrate it at that point in time. So it sat on the shelf for 6 years. And then when the industry caught up to where you guys were, that's when you started to generate revenue. And that $81 million of revenue, because of the internet bust, all of your customers were out of business and you were not able to pivot to use your technology.
Correct. 2 years prior to the demise of the internet and the telecommunications industry, I was able to get Cisco systems once again, a company called Tibco, and a company called Vitria to provide them licenses to this technology because Cisco at the time was adding a protocol called DSL into their routers. Our technology was such that it could adapt to those environments, but at a cost and a development period that fell apart when the industry went away. Cisco had invested $25 million. Each one of those other 2 companies, Tibco and Vitria, each had invested $5 million into Quintessent. Guess what happened? The DSL market went away. And so we call it double jeopardy. But technology alone does not make a business case.
The internet bust today, obviously AI is such a major player in everything that everybody does now. And there's a massive excitement around it. Do you see a AI bust coming down the line, or do you think that this has the kind of longevity that people kind of put it up to have?
Today, what I believe is happening is a very fragmented approach to finding the key markets. I see a lot of agents being built around the technology to accomplish 1 or 2 specific tasks. Those don't create the type of software that can be applied to different markets. And I believe AI is going to last a long time, but I think there's going to be a big convergence, consolidation of companies that are going to cost a lot of investors losses along the way, because any new technology like AI, you can't carry it on the virtue of solving easy problems. What AI has to do is mature enough that it solves massive problems, and it will win over a lot of markets that are anything that has to do with life-saving or cures. So the health industry has, I think, one of the greatest opportunities to make AI relevant.
I agree. There's a lot of companies using AI and they're building simple products or agents to solve simple problems. And I agree that only the ones that are solving complex problems are going to survive long term, because everybody else with a small subscription can build the exact same thing. So how is your simple solution going to get a massive market of customers and users if everybody else can just build it just as easily? So I see that coming down the pipeline, and I see a lot of people are going to probably be hurt from bad investments. They invested in something that is such a simple problem to solve, small software. Even the pharmaceuticals, also, you got to think about it from the perspective of AI. How quickly and easily is that information going to become available for the other pharmaceutical companies? How easy is it for anybody going to be able to create a new CRISPR version that's going to do whatever is necessary? That's what I'm curious about. How easy is it going to be for people to actually keep their trade secrets if AI is going to have all the answers?
The biggest issue that AI is going to have to overcome is the reliability factor. If it gets into the mission critical business that it needs to go into, I'm not sure that they are ready to have environments transition their dependency on AI until it is stable across the entire market. It's still very early in the marketplace, very early in its deployment. The large companies that sit back and wait until Microsoft, Apple, or one of those companies makes it a part of their corporate taglines. And they've already got their feelers out for companies they can acquire to merge those different visions into their vision. Then you know it's going to be a serious player in the industry.
AI is just a piece of the puzzle in any application, just like blockchain or any other technology that we have. It's not the picture, it's just a piece of the puzzle within that big picture. Now, I know you've had a number of different exits. Been involved with about 14 startups. What was the most impactful experience that you had throughout your business life, whether it's from an exit, good, bad? What's the most impactful situation that you've experienced?
Good question. I think the most impactful thing that I've ever done stems from two of my startups. I've had 14 of them, and the most impactful one was the very first one, being a part of growing Cisco system at the time from a kid that got married at 19 years of age, had a family by the time I was 25, going to college, being the first member of my family to go to college, first Hispanic kid in my extended family to go to a university like Stanford, meeting people in the industry like Steve Jobs and several others. Eric Schmidt, who worked for Sun Microsystems, who was a CEO of Google for a while, CEO of Novell Network, to the Craig McCaw projects that I mentioned. Cisco was always there for me. Having a company that still lives today, delivered its first products in 1989 and 90. Cisco has embedded the notion of making sure you become relevant every day you go to work. And it gave me exposure to the world.
Was that whole experience with Cisco supporting you, allowing you to grow, allowing you to learn and to lead and to build what you eventually built, what that was impactful for you?
And to be given shares of stock because you were loyal, you delivered what you said, and because they taught me how to be successful.
It's definitely a powerful thing when you have a mentor and a significant one at that in Cisco to be able to show you the way. You mentioned your interactions with Steve Jobs. What were those interactions like, and what did you take from that?
They were basically group settings. I had 2 one-on-ones with him at Apple headquarters, and the one-on-ones were basically understanding how he was going to move Apple forward and the things that he wished he had done differently in the early days, and the fact that he stayed too heavily involved with day-to-day operations and stepping in and leading the company from a technical perspective. He wasn't positive about decisions he was making, so he wanted to bring in outsiders to challenge his ideas before he made announcements within the company. And number two, he supported me very well when we introduced Next Step to McCaw Cellular. And lo and behold, he learned that tying to an IBM mainframe wasn't as easy as the engineers were saying.
When you say he supported you really well, what kind of support did he provide?
A different view of the whole networking and system and application world that Apple was delivering versus what Windows was delivering. He had a good database that provided me the why DOS wasn't going to be the OS of the future, and the fact that It was a text-based system for many years before the whole notion of graphics even touched Windows. And he also gave me a third-party understanding of why I had done well in aligning myself with Cisco, because the whole concept of Ethernet, TCP/IP, Unix was more relevant on the Apple side than it was on the Windows side. And so I was very negative on Microsoft. Well, I still am a little bit, because Windows 11 isn't quite as stable as they say it is. And
People who work with Steve Jobs and been around Steve Jobs often give an impression that he was a real prick. But you seem to have a different experience. Would you say that your experience with him has been very pleasant?
no, it's been very mechanical, I guess. You better come with him with facts. He doesn't like to deal with, this is your opinion. He goes, I'll do that. What he wants verification that he's doing the right stuff from a day-to-day perspective, but he really wants to have you challenge him.
This is very, very interesting to hear, but it makes sense. It sounds like he wanted to get out of the operations and do more of the leadership aspects of things.
He stepped out off and on in the operations world to get back into the technical side. He felt confident in the technical side, but he was a true chief technology officer.
One thing that you said that was interesting was that we were initially in this DOS operating system, which is text-based, and then we moved to a more visual operating system where you're clicking in is visual. And now we're kind of going back to text-based with the AI, where everything is text-based.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that it's going to advance again, and it's going to go back to more of a visual mechanism of utilizing AI. It'll be interesting to see how that evolves. I wanted to know, from all your experience with exits, both the good and the bad, what advice would you leave to people who are listening, who are in the world of starting up or exits, investing? What advice would you have for them based on your learnings?
Well, first and foremost is, don't limit your discovery work, due diligence work. Look beyond and validate through exposure to different worlds. Be the person that goes out to look at opportunities rather than what you believe to be your environment, your defined ecosystem. I would advise people to go out and do due diligence on your defined market and look at other complete ecosystems where your competitors, your partners are having discussions with each other and other people before you say, we're going to do this and we're going to partner with this person. Understand that everybody is a salesman when it comes down to it. If you buy into it too early, you're setting yourself up for some disappointing news, because there are always better approaches at any given time than yours. So I believe upper management, CEO, CFO should be looking outside of what they're doing with the technology and what others have done. And you'll find out there's very few uniqueness associated with a quantity of them. So I would advise people to look at that as a starting point and then modify your vision. What matters is, can you solve this problem better than that guy? It's not about one-for-one widgets. And people get confused with that. The biggest concern that investors have today is, do you really understand your market? Do you understand what problems you're solving? And have you adopted or built the right plan to reach the audience that you're trying to get to?
Let me just unpack that. Whatever the product or service you're providing from your business, it's really important to get out and see what everybody else is doing, because there's people that are smarter. There's a bunch of companies that are probably doing the same thing, companies that are doing something different, something better. And what you can learn and gather from all of that information intake to make your product and service better. And this is so important because ultimately it's that product and service that needs to get traction with real customers to hit those revenue and profit markers so that you can be attractive to the acquirer or attractive for an IPO and an exit. Did I hit that?
That's correct.
The future of exits and what that looks like with AI, with digital assets, with all the different technologies that are coming about. I feel like what an exit used to look like is going to become very different. Exits are going to be much easier in the future and for much earlier stage companies. But with the advancement of AI and digital assets, what we're doing at Blockstation, what others are doing, how do you see that changing the exit game for the future?
First and foremost is AI needs to become more relevant because there needs to be more automation that comes into play. In the case of digital asset environment, which basically encompasses securities, brokers, stock exchanges, currency, cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, they all have to be understood. And more so, the company like Blockstation will be valuable to the level that there is few things that it doesn't understand how to service, apply, test, and deliver. The relevance of tokenization to an exit strategy is one of the mechanisms Blockstation is bringing to the industry to provide the ability to perform tokenized IPOs for startups who have difficulty raising funds in a standard approach where the venture capitalist, the family office environment can do it anywhere in the world. Digital assets, tokenized IPOs, will be a part of every future transaction that crosses the entire global stock exchange environment.
Then, for people who are listening and they're interested in, connecting with you, what would you want to connect with people for and how should they reach out to you?
Well, to date, I've been out performing due diligence, advising companies to find different programs, avenues to gain financing. I use LinkedIn as a method of getting introductions for investors, brokers, clients, whatever, to get in touch with me.
I want to thank you for taking the time to spend the day with us doing this podcast. Really appreciate your insights and experience, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Well, thank you, Jay, for thinking to start this program.